News just broke that the former Chase Manhattan chief executive David Rockefeller has died at the age of 101. The elitist, who had an estimated fortune of $3 billion, retired as head of Chase Manhattan in 1981 after a 35-year career. In the statement from the Rockefeller Foundation confirming his death, Rockefeller was described as one of the most influential figures in the history of American philanthropy and finance, considered by many to be America's last great international business statesman. Rockefeller, also known as the banker's banker, according to the statement, is said to have donated almost $2 billion over his lifetime to various institutions including Rockefeller University, Harvard University and Art Museum. David was the youngest of 6 children born to John D. Rockefeller Jr. and the grandson of Standard Oil co-founder John D. Rockefeller.
If you've ever had this feeling that something was terribly wrong with the world that we live in, but you couldn't figure out just what it was, then you've come to the right place. Secret societies, mystery religions, and the Illuminati have been controlling our reality since the beginning of time. But not anymore, because there is an awakening happening, and you are about to become a part of it. Wake up, because this is a call for an uprising.
This is a call for an uprising. Welcome to today's show. Well, good news comes rarely in this world, and some might say, how could you be happy about something like this happening? But at the age of 101 years old, Satanist, occultist, quote-unquote philanthropist David Rockefeller has kicked the bucket. Unfortunately for Mr. Rockefeller, who was involved in so many of the atrocious abominations in this world, who was a frontman for the women's empowerment movement, which really began the separation between families and God because the children were being raised by the schools. David Rockefeller, unfortunately for him and his fellow New World Order globalist buddies, he will not live to see the Antichrist's arrival. He will not live to see the New World Order in full place, even though a lot of the stepping stones have already been put in place for this to come to fruition in due time. So let's read about David Rockefeller, who, as of March 20th, has officially died at the age of 101. I guess this time around he wasn't able to get another heart transplant. He wasn't able to fight Father Time. He was not able to defeat God, as these people think that they can outlive or live as long as they please. They can outlive everyone with the science and technology and transhumanism. But God, again, shows you that he's in total control. David Rockefeller, the banker and philanthropist with the fabled family name who controlled Chase Manhattan Bank for more than a decade and wielded vast influence around the world even longer as he spread the gospel of American capitalism, died on Monday morning at his home in Picantiso Hills, New York. He was 101. A family spokesman confirmed the death. Chase Manhattan had been long known as the Rockefeller Bank, though the family never owned more than 5% of its shares. But Mr. Rockefeller was more than a steward. As a chairman and chief executive throughout the 70s, he made it David's Bank, as many called it, expanding its operations internationally. Yep, yep, hooray. His stature was greater than any corporate title might convey. However, his influence was felt in Washington and foreign capitals, in the corridors of New York City government, art museums, great universities, and the public schools. So Mr. David Rockefeller, he could well be the last of an increasingly less visible family to have cut so imposing a figure on the world stage, on the global stage. As an advocate of the economic interests of the United States and of his own bank, he was a force in global financial affairs and in his country's foreign policy. He was received in foreign capitals with the honors accorded a chief of state. He was the last surviving grandson of John D. Rockefeller, the tycoon who founded the Standard Oil Company in the 19th century and built a fortune that made him America's first billionaire, and his family one of the richest and most powerful in the nation's history. Don't you love how they quote it like that? That he was the son of the tycoon who founded the Standard Oil Company and built a fortune that made him America's first. He built a fortune. Sure, he built it. All of these elitists They give themselves the fortune. They steal the world's resources and give themselves as much money as they want and turn us into slaves for them through the mind control, through the enslavement of the dollar, through taxes. But of course, the New York Times, they'll be applauding Mr. Rockefeller's life. They will be talking about the unnecessary amount of heart transplants the guy has taken, even at the age of 100 years old, taking heart transplants away from people who actually should get them, young people who might be born with a disease. But it doesn't matter because David Rockefeller has officially kicked the bucket. Now, I'm not one to say where Mr. Rockefeller's going, but I can sure speculate that he's not going to be up at the pearly gates, because we all know that David Rockefeller never found salvation through Jesus Christ. In fact, David Rockefeller is one of the highest ranking satanic elite families, along with the Rothschilds, who really, over the last 100 years, put his foot on the pedal to help bring in this new world order. Because people say, what happened in the last 50 years, 60 years? How did we get to this point? How did we go from Little House on the Prairie to the industrial age to this point where we have people walking around like zombies on their cell phones, praising people like, Katy Perry and Beyonce, into this self-idol worship, into the worship of oneself and the materialistic crap of this world? A godless society is what they've created. Well, you could thank people like Mr. Rockefeller and the Rothschilds, these old hags that just had continued to go on and defy Father Time. Well, Mr. Rockefeller no longer can fight Father Time. And I'm sure his soul was transferred into another body, because that's what these elites believe they can do. They do rituals before they're going to go, and they try to put their souls into other, bodies or portals, as they believe it to be. That's what these elites think. But they are not doing that, because God is in control, like I said. So let's continue with the legacy of Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller lived all his life in splendor and privilege. Whether in Manhattan, as a boy, he and his brothers would roller skate along Fifth Avenue, trailed by a limousine in case they grew tired. Oh, that's so funny. That is funny. Splendor and privilege, folks. He lived his life in splendor and privilege. Well, when you store up treasure here on earth, what's left now, Mr. Rockefeller? What's left of that treasure you stored up here, the billions of dollars that you're worth? Nothing, because you never seek salvation. And not only that, the amount of souls that you've led astray, the amount of people that have probably been sacrificed at your hands alone is unimaginable. It says, imbued with the understated manners of the East Coast elite, he loomed large in the upper reaches of a New York social world of glittering black tie galas. Ah, the black tie galas, with the black and white tuxedo and the masks like the Rothschild ball. Oh, what a life well lived. What's the underlining theme? And so far in reading about Mr. Rockefeller and his life of privilege that was handed to him, that was passed on through these elite bloodlines, what is the common theme? That they all store up what? They store up treasure. Who cares about any of this stuff? Look at, his upper reaches of New York's social world of glittering black tie galas. His philanthropy was monumental, and so was his art collection. Well, that art collection don't mean much to you now, does it, Mr. Rockefeller? A museum like, he had over 15,000 pieces of art, and his home was like a museum, many of them masterpieces. Well, not worth much to you now, Mr. Rockefeller. Some lining the walls of his offices 56 floors above the streets of Rockefeller Center, to which he repaired, robust and active, well into his 90s. In silent testimony to his power and reach with his Rolodex, a catalog of some 150,000 names of people he had met. As a banker statesman, it required a room of its own beside his office. Spread out below that corporate area was a city he loved and influenced mightily. How did he influence the city? Because of the money that he was printing? So why should this man have influence over anyone? Jesus Christ should be the only influence over anyone on this planet. It says he was instrumental in rallying the private sector to help resolve New York's fiscal crisis in the mid-70s. He was chairman of the Modern Art. They go on and on, just kissing the rear end of Mr. Rockefeller. I don't need to read more. They talk about his privileged life, the youngest of 6 siblings, how privileged he was, how wonderful he was. They don't talk about his connection to Satanism and the occult. They don't talk about some of his most famous quotes, but don't worry, I've got them on standby here. Let me read some. This present window of opportunity during which a truly peaceful and interdependent world order might be built will not be open for too long. We are on the verge of a global transformation. All we need is the right major crisis, and the nations will accept the new world order. What a wonderful quote from Mr. Rockefeller. Should I read more? Sure, I will. Mr. Rockefeller says, some even believe we are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, categorizing my family and me as internationalists, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure, one world, if you will. If that's the charge, I stand guilty, and I'm proud of it. Are you proud of it now, Mr. Rockefeller? Are you proud? Because the New World Order that is being ushered in, of course, is one of David Rockefeller's finest achievements in his mind, along with the Rothschilds and all the other elite bloodline families. But he's not going to live to see it. The question is, will Queen Elizabeth, will George W. Sr., one of the heads behind the creation of the CIA, the most corrupt organization in the world, which is behind all false flag events that occur for the most part around the world, which is also involved in the kidnapping and trafficking of children, which seems to be a common theme that many don't talk about when talking about Pizzagate or Pedogate or any of these things, is the CIA's involvement and the Finders Cult and other things that show evidence of their connection. And obviously, the technology that we have today, only the CIA could cover up something as big as these pedo rings that occur, or that are going on, I should say. But Mr. Rockefeller, do you have any last quotes for us before we finish this video? All right, one more. He says, we are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. So pretty much saying the Washington Post, the New York Times, who posted this propaganda article praising the guy, have covered up and just spit out fake news to whatever the Rockefeller family and the Rothschild families want out there, whatever agendas. He says, it would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity during these years. But the world is now much more sophisticated and prepared to march towards a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in past centuries. So these are just some quotes. Mr. Rockefeller, who was all about depopulation, was all about a one world government. Well, the life of prestige has worn out, as it always does for these Satanists, for these occultists. It always catches up. 101 years he survived, he managed to defy time, but not any longer. So all the treasure, the thousands of dollars in art, all of the things that he did to push forward a new world order, he was never able to see. But maybe there's a flat screen TV down in hell, and maybe he'll be able to check in and see what's going on up here. But Mr. Rockefeller, and I know people out there are going to say, well, that's really mean-spirited. He's 101 years old. Do you know how many heart transplants he took away and became went to the top of donors lists? So how many hearts he could have taken away from people out there who really need it? His plan for us, what he's done with the feminist movement and destroying families. The Rockefellers are one of the families single-handedly behind that entire movement. So when people say, well, how come there's so many kids that don't believe in God? How come there's so many kids that idol worship? Well, it starts with the family, right? It starts with taking women out of the home, parents out of the home, both of them out of the home, and making them slaves to his system, and then having them raised by a school which doesn't allow God in the schools. But now, just like I talked about a couple months ago, an article came out, which I did a video. It's just, at the time, I just did it in humor because somebody was predicting, a website predicts the deaths of people every year. Rockefeller was on the list, Queen Elizabeth, George W. Bush. So we've seen Rockefeller now bite the dust. One of the global elites is no longer with us. I'll get my tissues out for those of you who feel bad and need one. But me, on the other hand, no. This is a great day for the world. Anytime one of these satanic elites leaves the earth and goes to his true destiny, which is hell, because that's who they've served their entire time on earth, is they've served Satan. They've been rewarded a glutton of riches. They have hurt so many people with their selfish, sick ways. Now it's time for Mr. Rockefeller to meet who he thinks his true maker is, the man that he's worshipped, Satan himself. Rest in peace, old man. Say hi to your buddy Aleister Crowley down there. Spit in his face for me. I thank you for listening to today's show. God bless all of you and your families.